Okay, I'm back. I hope you got some refreshments and some snacks. Now, let's get on with the second part, with the famous Thumbelina episode from 1997. It starts out in the Amazon rainforests of Brazil instead of Denmark, like in the original Hans Christian Andersen story. We see a childless mother praying to the river every day to have a child of her very own. And wouldn't you know it, she got her wish. Inside that plant was probably the cutest Thumbelina I've ever seen in my life. That's right, the most adorable version of the character you could possibly think of. And with fucking Rosie Perez voicing her, how can you get any cuter than that? Soon, Thumbelina and her mother became a real family. They wore traditional cloths, collected water from the river, and walked through the rainforest together. In fact, Thumbelina did everything her mother did, in her own little way. Then, as time went by, Thumbelina grew older, but she realized that she was not very happy. And then, one night, we see Mrs. Lieberman, voiced by the hysterical Harvey Fierstein, kidnap Thumbelina and try to force her to marry her son Sonny, voiced by Bronson Prejean from that show Step by Step, where he played a French guy. Anyway, back to the episode. And then Thumbelina and Sonny had a little conversation about being different. Yeah, I'm pretty much like that too. But then Thumbelina made Sonny find a lady toad. And then Sonny and the red toad instantly fell in love. And she actually felt great having touched other people's lives, and she decided to go home. But she did not realize how big the rainforest was. And then she sees Hercules. And then we're introduced to Katie, the katydid, which is a kind of a grasshopper. And then we're also introduced to Lola, the ladybug, voiced by Debbie Allen. And Katie is voiced by Chito Rivera. And they had a cute little fiesta, which is one of the most memorable scenes in the episode. Yep, Thumbelina and her new friends, or amigas, went out and had many fun adventures, but nature always had the last word, especially in a rainforest. The storm season came in full force, causing the river to overflow its banks. And then Thumbelina runs across Mrs. Lieberman again. Thumbelina, speak to me, my darling. Ah! What am I? What happened? What happened? You almost drowned. Well, if I haven't had the presence of mind to give you mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. Thank you. I feel better now. It's my chicken soup, darling. Works every time. Thank you, but suppose I better get back to my adventures. Of course, darling. Go. Have fun. True, it was you who introduced my Sonny to that cold-blooded toad he married. And also true, they went off to live with her folks, leaving me alone in my old age. But don't worry, forget it. Run along, go, have fun. At least I lived long enough to save your life. Well, I guess I could stay another couple of days. Oh, good. Let's go shopping. Oh, I just love shopping. Yep, Thumbelina and Mrs. Lieberman went shopping, which, of course, never happens in the original Hans Christian Andersen novel. But hey, it's a unique spin on the classic story that I bet even Hans Christian Andersen himself would have approved. Because he was so unique in his work. Well, mostly Thumbelina and the Little Mermaid. But we're not talking about the Little Mermaid. We're talking about Thumbelina. And then Thumbelina and Mrs. Lieberman both get abducted by bats. That's right, fucking bats! Instead of beetles and a mole like in the original story. And then they were swept off their feet for a date with a bloodthirsty bachelor. And of course we're introduced to El Mujarago, voiced by Edward James Olmos from the infamous Cinderella episode, which we already talked about. And of course El Mujarago decided not to eat them because he actually saw Thumbelina's cuteness. And, well, he wanted to marry her. But, of course, there had to be a catch. Because he's a bat, much like the mole in the original story. Because he wanted her to stay in the darkness with him. Because moles and bats can only see in the dark. And of course, there were a lot of wedding shit going on, because he wanted to marry her. Which is obviously crazy by today's standards. Merida, once you are my wife, you'll become queen of the Bat World. All this grandeur will be yours, including my art collection. And of course, Mario, voiced by Antonio Sabato Jr., is also like that. Because I didn't talk about him earlier. And of course, Thumbelina strategically made up the statement that she did in fact want to marry the bat, or El Mujarago, if you live in Brazil, or Die Fledermaus if you live in Germany. Then Thumbelina and Mrs. Lieberman were smart enough to save everyone from being killed off by those bats. Let's go, quick! Do you know what your fiancé would do to us if he saw this? Fiancé? The king of bats is planning to marry me. Oh, it's gonna be a big, splashy, expensive wedding. Catered. Quick, quick! Climb on my back and I'll fly us out of here. Mrs. Lieberman panicked, fearing that her generous froggy physique would be left behind. And then, later on, in a different scene, we actually see Thumbelina try and marry El Mujarago. But of course, those plans backfire. And of course, the glowworms did in fact light up the bat cave, because bats can only see in the dark, and they were blinded by the light. Then they flew out of that cave in a heartbeat. And then they flew back home, where her mom was. In her mother's garden, Thumbelina made new friends, special creatures just like her, from all over the world who live in beautiful flowers. And with her new friends, along with those she had met during her travels, Thumbelina could not help but live happily ever after. And that's pretty much the end of that story. Now for a little history lesson. Happily Ever After, Fairy Tales for Every Child, originally aired on HBO in around March of 1995, and ended its run on July 18th, 2000. Starting with Jack and the Beanstalk and ending with Aesop's Fables, a whodunit musical. And of course, that cartoon had a shit ton of celebrities doing the voices. Okay, enough for the review for today. I hope you enjoyed it. Like, subscribe, comment. And as always, amigos, au revoir und auf Wiedersehen.